Recently, I played a tournament on chess.com, which was called the Team Norway Summer Tournament 2024, from the ranges 1400 to 1600. Good day, and welcome to today's video, guys. Today we will be going through this tournament and, well, having a look at the games, and hopefully some of them will be interesting. This was essentially my first experience with any tournament chess, which was really fun. It's not quite over the board, but I'm hoping we can get there at some point, which would be really fun, and I'm looking forward to share that with you guys in the future. As for now, this is going to be our tournament we've been playing thus far, which was a tournament with two groups of players. Two groups, 5 players in each group. In our first round here, we played 4 different players and 2 matches against each player, and we'll have a look at that. And 2 players got to the final as well, where they squared off the winners from each group. Now, let's go to our first game today. This is our first opponent, and I'll be showing one game from each opponent. This is just going to show how we won our first game from this position. Essentially, we got into an endgame where we had 2 pawns pushed and forced our way up with queens, and our opponent resigned. So we are at 1-0 against this opponent. And then, off to our second game. This was an interesting one, and I'm looking forward to sharing it. We started off with a Sicilian here. We tried some interesting theory here, and we got going. Should have apparently played this for a couple of moves, pushing our b pawn, but I thought I had some decent plans here of pushing up, backed by this rook. We went all the way up here, maybe overcommitting a bit on the queen side, but I thought grabbing space looked pretty decent here. I didn't quite love seeing this, as this pawn got pinned now, but I thought it wasn't all that scary still. Apparently made a slight inaccuracy here, and we jumped in with our knight, and this was apparently a blunder. I'm going through this a bit quick, but there are a few games, so please bear with me. At this point, apparently our opponent could take our knight, and I guess hit at our structure. They took here though, and well, at this point we were in a pretty decent position. Our opponent even made some mistakes here, and all good stuff. Should have apparently jumped in, seemed a bit scary doing so, as our knight would have not been all that defended. Went over to the side here. I think it was to get out here, defend our stuff on this side, and maybe get this rook into the game, if I remember correctly. But this is where I made a mistake. And as you can see, our opponent got a free fork against our rook and our pawn. We had to move out of the way. The rook was, or the pawn rather, was lost, and we were hit with a new fork on the next move, which was a pretty rough combination to be hit with, and we had to move our rook as well, and now this position seems a bit loose, and in this position without our d-pawn, this queen side seems a bit overextended. We took here, our opponent played well here, and we did not capture correctly. Apparently we should have captured with the bishop. Our opponent seems to have blundered their advantage, but I feel like in this position it seems quite scary for us. We are under a lot of pressure through our pawn and bishop here. The pawns are a bit overextended. We haven't gotten our rooks coordinated yet. Move the queen here to defend this pawn and cover this threat here. I think it was about our only move. Apparently we could have pushed the pawn. And if this... Oh, I did not realize this even after reviewing the game previously, but well, you live and you learn. We just juggled pieces for a bit here, moved around, and our opponent found a pretty lethal combination of pushing pawns here. Played a fancy move here, because our opponent couldn't take our bishop, because then we won like this. So instead, we closed out this bishop, trying to make it as useless as possible. Our opponent's knight jumped in, and apparently we should have taken it, because at this point it got into this incredibly powerful outpost. We moved here with our queen, dodged to the side, our opponent went in with the queen, and at this point we were in a horrible position. We had to pin our opponent's queen to the king, so as not to lose material here. This didn't work because we would have gotten forked by the knight. So we had to move both of our rooks to the a file, which was not all that good. Our opponent got a pawn on the sixth rank here, and well, our position here is looking dire, as you can see. Had to close out the bishop here, or this looked really scary. Our opponent pushed here and hit at our structure, and at this point stuff looks really scary. It was difficult to find moves. I thought this is incredibly lost. Still tried to play on though. Our opponent appears to have made a slight mistake. This allowed us to push this pawn, and our threat here is this bishop controls this square, and if we get this move in, we have free reins to promote our pawn to a queen. Our opponent went here, we went up, and well, we traded off some pieces. I think this was one of the only moves our opponent could have played. This was good as well, but they found they had to get rid of our bishop, so we could not get our promotion. In this position still, this configuration here is really difficult to deal with. Our opponent's pawns are getting too strong. But here though, the knight here took our pawn, and oops, they blundered a piece. We should have won the game here. We definitely should have won this game here. I looked at this and was a bit frustrated with myself, because I thought if we take this bishop, we are getting forked and losing a piece in return, which was not the case whatsoever, because as you can see here, our rook covers the e7 square, so that's no problem. So essentially, I got blind, and we still had a draw on our hands here. At least so I thought, but this got quite tactical, back and forth, and at this point I thought I can't see any moves here. Our opponent is threatening to promote, those two pawns here are looking scary, and I don't quite love what happens if the king here gets any mobility, which currently it doesn't, but it might happen. So I thought here our best option was just sliding back and forth here. First of all, threatening a checkmate down here with the bishop and the pawn, and coming back and forth here in case this becomes a threat, because once the bishop comes up here, this becomes scary. Went back and forth, but apparently there was a winning idea here, which I would have never found. Rook to a8. Didn't see it, and we got a draw this game by repetition. First opponent, 1 win, 1 draw. How did our second opponent go for us? First game, we won here by a Caro-Kann. Just be jumping through the game here, and this is what it looked like towards the end. And essentially here, we got a queen and our opponent resigned. 1-0. This game here was quite interesting. I kind of spoiled the result here by accident, but we'll still be going through the game. I thought it was really interesting. As you can see here, I went for an interesting setup, sacrificing a pawn here and trying to win it back like this, and applying pressure with the knight. I just thought I would like to get out of some theory to get a game on our hands. Our opponent's queen went out, we didn't capture it correctly, but we did get a pawn back. You can say we sacrificed our queen, but we threatened our opponent's queen in response, and out of the opening, our opponent's pawns were split, and I thought we were in a decent position. We jumped around with some pieces for a while here. This is an interesting move. If this was played, we would have taken the bishop. So we jumped around, moved our pieces around for a bit. I think the a6 move here was a bit bad because our pawns got stuck here for what was going to be basically the remainder of the game. The remaining most of the game at least. Afterwards, the remainder of the game. We jumped around. We did essentially have a piece advantage from this point because our opponent made a mistake here. Let's say they went back here. Then I guess we just win all the stuff at our opponent's side. I can't quite, honestly, this seems kind of stupid, but I cannot quite remember why I did. When I played this game, I remember our opponent had to take. I cannot quite remember the intricacies here, but this is in fact the best move. And we went back. We had a slight material advantage, but our opponent did pose some problems for us. We kind of tried to position our pieces well here, threaten this pawn, threaten this. Our opponent had the bishop here, so it became a bit difficult to move around it too much. This pawn got targeted. Our opponent's king went in, and we took this pawn. And here, what would have happened here? We had a threat of pinning this bishop. So essentially here we had a pretty decent game on our hands. Pushed some pawns, grabbed some space. Our opponent created some really scary position for us here. Because at this point, after shuffling pieces for a bit, we almost got checkmated. The threat here is essentially this move, and it's lights out because of this bishop and the king. So this was forced. I almost missed the move. I almost played a different move and got checkmated here. But this would have allowed us to come here now because the bishop would have been defended by our own rook. So from this point on, we just shuffled pieces for a while, and this, which I kind of accidentally revealed to you guys, is how the game ended. After which this becomes an unavoidable promotion. Two opponents. First opponent, 1.5 points for us. Second opponent, we won both of our games. And then onto our third opponent here. We won our first game by pinning this queen here to their king, protected by our bishop and threatening a promotion. We had a second game here, which was really interesting. Starting off with a Sicilian. This was a really nice game. A lot of theory here. We got into an interesting position. And here we had some simplification. We positioned, moved around here, got our pawns connected. And this, it doesn't seem all that bad for us, but there is definitely something to be said about 3 pawns against 1 here. Shuffled a few rooks. Thought we won a pawn, but our opponent played a really good move here, pushing this pawn, and suddenly they had a threat here with a defended passed pawn. We traded a pair of rooks, pushed our pawns, tried to create some kind of counterplay of our own, and maybe we had some chances of promoting a queen of our own. We started moving up here, and we lost this pawn, which was not ideal, but we did have some counterplay of our own down here. We went up, defending this pawn still, and here, just went back and forth. As you can see, this is essentially a draw here at this point. Isn't a whole lot to play for, but I made a mistake. I missed an essential tactic here, and thought instead we might as well try and create some kind of play here and prevent the rook from coming around and winning a lot of stuff. So instead, I thought let's prepare some kind of powerful pawn chain from which we can maybe win the game. Now, what was played and why was this bad? there was a tactic here, which I had not seen. When we took, our opponent went here. First of all, if we went here, this becomes unavoidable, and we would have had to trade off our rook. So we get forced off here and this. If we take the rook, our opponent gets a queen with a check, and the game would be over. So third opponent, 1 win, 1 loss. Thus far, we have a score of 4.5 out of 6, and so does our next opponent. Whoops. If you can just excuse me for a quick second here. I'm not going to be spoiling all the games. I just want to come back to the start of the games. There you go. That's unintentional. I had forgotten to reset the games when I was looking at them in advance of this video. Now, for our fourth opponent, they were really strong, I have to say. Up until this point, all of the remaining games of our section or our group had essentially been played, and we were tied with this opponent. 4.5 and 4.5, so we had to win against this opponent to advance to the finals if we were to do so. So how did we start off? I wanted to try out some e4 stuff, which I like to do when playing daily games, because I find them to be interesting ways of practicing theory. We had a lot of piece movement. Found a configuration here where we went up a pawn after a massive trade. Moved a bit around here. And this game is the game I wasn't really intending to show because, we had 2 games against each opponent here. But I'll be going through the game quickly still because I thought it was interesting. We got to an endgame here. And our opponent played 1 incorrect move, allowing us to play c5. And the reason c5 is important here is because once we get checked, it allows us to make progress by coming up behind our pawn and threatening to capture stuff here, and also escorting our pawn. So in usual endgame style, we got our stuff going here, and we won like this. 1-0 against this opponent. Going well thus far. How about our next game? We got off to a decent opening. It's quite normal stuff here with an exchange variation. We castled and traded some pieces. At this point I thought, okay, we don't have a lot of play here. We don't have many pawn pushes, I think. We seem to be a bit passive. Let's get our knights out and prepare for this move. I didn't quite love our opponent having pressure down here, but it didn't seem all that bad at this point. Our opponent prepares e4, of course, by playing f3 and backing up the pawn. We try to move around a bit. Got our queen over to the side, and our opponent kind of displaced their bishop. An important thing here is I wanted to get our queen to this square, because now if this is pushed, we get this pawn with a check. We had to block some stuff here, prevent some annoying tactics. Went back with our bishop, opening up our scope here, and now our opponent made a slight mistake by pushing the pawn at an inopportune moment. We didn't quite capitalize, should have apparently went for this pawn, which was difficult to protect. Instead, we went up here, hit this rook, and honestly I can't quite remember why our opponent did not defend it. There was some tactical stuff here in this position. I guess probably it was this move here, if I am not mistaken, although it does not lose a lot of material, it still seems a bit annoying. But our opponent tried to counter by hitting our queen, and then we have this tactic, taking this rook. Ooh, it seems my computer is starting to struggle here a bit. Hopefully I don't have to make several takes. It doesn't like analyzing for a long time. It's an old laptop for sure. We got up some material here because of tactics, and at this point we won the game. Let's go back here, in fact, because the game is essentially even. How did it end so quickly? Here our opponent thought they would counter our threat by hitting our queen, and we had to move here, they thought, and then they could move the rook. But we took here, and well, if they take, we take the queen, and we just end up with more material. So they figured here they had to take our bishop, and then we could move to the side and come with a threat of a checkmate here, while also hitting the bishop. Our opponent had a way of blocking it by coming up with a knight here, defending the bishop and cutting off our chance of checkmating. But then we took the pawn, threatening this knight once again, and if we take the knight, the bishop is lost, and the bishop is essentially already trapped, which is bad in and of itself. And once this knight moves, we reveal stuff against the king with 2 coordinated rooks, which would have been really bad. So our opponent resigned, and we got our win in this game. And we essentially got to the final against another player who won their bracket. As I mentioned, this was just a small mini tournament in a club on chess.com between 10 players, and this was our opponent for the finals, Pals 444. So what happened here? We played a pretty normal position here, an interesting setup which I've been mentioning in our chess tourney to 1500 Elo against the London, playing this b6 move to try and fight for the center from the side or the flank. We had some pretty decent stuff going on here. We had some inaccuracies, as is normal, and there we pushed. Our opponent's bishop went out to the side. We traded some pieces. I thought, okay, at this point, how do we win this position? I didn't see a whole lot here, but I did see a sequence of pushing both of the knights back and grabbing space, and then we could play on the c file, or d file rather, and see what we could get done. So we went for the idea, pushing the knights around, and we had the bishop here. We dodged this diagonal here, which seemed scary. Dodged the rook. Created some threats here against the knights. Captured, or went for the d file. And our opponent made a slight mistake here, I think, which allowed us to get in here. And why is this so good? Simply because if our opponent takes and we take, this becomes difficult to stop now, because it both hits the queen and protects this pawn, making it a defended post pawn. And you can see the arrows I'm drawing here are for some reason getting deleted. Don't ask me, it's been happening a bit recently. But this essentially locked in the d file for us, and we got our doubling up of rooks. We went for this against our opponent's queen. So we had this secured. If they would have taken here, we would have gotten the queen. So we went for an in-between move. Danger levels, as Gotham Chess likes to say. We got the knight here and won a pawn. For the first time, we are up material. And if our opponent takes, we have a really nice position with this pawn chain. And indeed, they took. So how do we go about winning this position? First of all, let's move our king over to prevent this move here from breaking up our position. Our queen covers this, our king covers this, and maybe we can come up to this point and kick the queen out at some point. We pushed our pawn. Why? Because if this is played, then we have this. Hopefully you guys... Yeah, but my browser crashed for a second. Well, luckily it didn't affect the recording. The knight here jumps out to the side. We got to push our pawn. We got up some material, had some threats down here, and this was essentially the nail in the coffin in this game here. Because after this we got this, and either way we would have gotten in with our pieces in one way or another. 1-0 in the finals. So how did our second game go? We are white and playing a 1d4 game, as is quite typical for us, and we got this kind of a structure, which I've been mentioning recently. I find interesting trying to experiment with. Pushed up here, got the knight kicked out, and here we had an interesting tactic. It seemed like we blundered a pawn, right? We didn't, because this. And where does the knight go? Not many places. There is this, which is... or never mind. Why was this not played? I can't remember at this point even. Oh, it was because this was a move. Oh, no. Honestly, I can't remember. I think it was a matter of this move or this move. If the queen moves, I think it's still good, but this gets scary, so I think that's maybe why it was not played. Our opponent went for another move, which was taking this pawn, and essentially we had 3 pawns for a knight, and we had an isolated pawn here and an isolated pawn here. The computer says we are winning, but, well, it's difficult to prove. That's for sure. We went back, protecting all our stuff, the rook and the pawn. Had to develop our pieces here. At this point it was difficult to figure out a plan here. I thought, okay, how do we go about this? Most likely we want to castle, and we are never going to castle as long as this queen stares down here. Our king needs safety, or we are going to lose. We can't get our bishop up here, and it's difficult to even get close to doing so. So I figured out we could go for this and force the queen out, because our knight covers this. This is covered here. And if the queen comes back, we can trade. So essentially we get to force the queen off of this diagonal by going for this maneuver. We went out here, developed our bishop. Now this wasn't as crucial, coming here that is, because the queen was off of the diagonal. So instead we went here and got active in a more aggressive fashion, while still maintaining eyes on this pawn, which was important. We went back here, maintaining some pieces, created some pressure down here against the knight, and targeted the queen. This got scary for a second here. Had to defend our stuff. There were a whole lot of threats coming out in different directions and discovering attacks and whatnot. Had to castle, finally got to do so after a long time, and should have went here. Went here though, applying some pressure against the knight. Our opponent counter targeted us, or made a counter threat by hitting our bishop. We dodged it, should have apparently taken. Our opponent's king is something we checked instead, because here I thought I found a really good maneuver. It looks like this is good, but I thought, okay, a more concrete way of winning material is this, which is a check and forcing our opponent's hand, and then we get around here defending this pawn from in front and also pinning this knight to the bishop. Went for the maneuver. Our opponent's knight went here, which I had not even spotted. And, well, why did I... Oh, I went here, of course. Yeah, that's because I thought we can force the queen into an awkward spot, but our opponent still had a good position to go to, which was not ideal. We went back here, won a pawn, but our knight here is hanging. Jumped in. Now this is a threat. Our opponent jumped in, hit our rook, and targeted this. We had to come back, targeting the pawn and the knight. This is defended, but now we can get in here and trade off material as we are up a piece and got a pawn back. Our opponent made a mistake here, which honestly I don't blame them, because this was difficult to spot, but we had this move. I didn't see it, because this is not all that easy to spot, I think, because we have a couple of threats here, taking the rook and also checkmating, which would have won material. I didn't see it, went here instead, and I thought, okay, this just looks good. Either we win this knight, or we win the pawn with a checkmate maybe. Here I saw we had a really cool tactic. You can stop here and see if you can find it. The tactic in question is not retreating. We can take this knight, and our opponent resigned here in fact, because if they take, we have checkmate. So well, that's our last game there. We went 2-0 in the finals, and currently we are at 1629 ELO in daily games, which is a lot higher than we are in rapid chess. But the reason I like playing daily games, which honestly I haven't talked about a whole lot thus far, is because I've got something called aphantasia, which essentially, at least I think that's what I've got, which means I can't visualize. I do not have pictures in my head whatsoever. So when I play chess, I don't see a chessboard in my head. I can't move the pieces around. I just have to the best way I can describe it is conceptualize where the pieces will be moving. And well, that's what I do. And this kind of daily chess movie playing at least makes it easier for me to follow, because you can make moves on the chessboard without actually moving. I can show you guys in a current game I'm playing. Let's say this game here. Let's come back to the browser. What you can do here is you can go into the analysis board, and then you can play around here and just say, oh, have a look at all the games we're playing, or all the moves we're playing. And then I can visualize, which makes it a whole lot easier for me to play, as opposed to not having the option of doing so. So well, that's just a little insight into some kind of chess stuff I've been doing recently, which essentially this has been what I've been doing apart from our daily games. I've been decreasing the games I've been playing in terms of daily games recently, because I haven't had a whole lot of time, but I do find it to be a really good way of helping with my calculation skills and opening knowledge and whatnot. It's really fun, and I could definitely recommend it to some of you guys who might be interested. Well, I would really like some feedback if you guys enjoyed this video or not. I thought it was fun to make and fun to play the games as well. So please do keep me updated if you would be interested in seeing more tournaments in the future. And also maybe even suggestions as to how to improve the format, as this was slightly done on the fly and just picking out which games seemed more interesting from the different opponents, whatnot. So yeah, of course, definitely do keep me updated if it's interesting. I do know some of you the guys have shown an interest in seeing over the board tournaments, but this I thought at least was a compromise, as I haven't quite gotten around to over the board chess. So well then, this has been our video for today. You can look forward to tomorrow's video, because that's when our journey to 2000 ELO is going to start, which I'm really looking forward to. So well, thanks to all of our opponents from this tournament. It was really fun. We ended with a score of 8-1-1. 8 wins, 1 draw and 1 loss. And well, hope to see all of you guys tomorrow. Yeah, I'm just lost for words here, or at least stumbling a bit. Tomorrow is going to be fun. We're going to be starting off from day 1 again. And I hope to have you guys there with me along this new journey as well. Well, that's about it for today. Hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.